bit about earthquakes and faults in the Bay Area. And then we're also going to learn about different types of earthquakes that occur around the world. Just so you realize, earthquakes are the most devastating. That's where you get a lot of problems or deaths caused to earthquakes around the world. So it's one of the most terrible hazards that can afflict a society. Sometimes up to 200,000 people die at one time. So earthquakes are powerful, but if you learn the science behind them, they become something to learn about, and you can protect yourself. So we're going to be starting. I'm Dr. Joyce Bluford. Most kids call me Dr. Joyce. This is a subject about earthquakes that I love. I'm a geologist, and we are going to enter earthquake zone. Debbie Davison will be doing activities, so there'll be 4 activities that you can do at home to support what we've just learned about. So let's take a look at what we're going to do today. If you notice, there's a map right there, and it shows you little dots. Now that's how, if you go up in a helicopter, there's not these black lines that say this is the Hayward Fault or the San Andreas Fault. It is, it tells you these lines are formed by geologists, or the specific type of scientist that studies earthquakes are called seismologists. And seismologist has to do with the waves that are generated, or the energy that's released from the earth cracking. Now, if you notice here, we have these orange dots, and that is what tells us or outlines the different faults, especially in the Bay Area. We're going to look in the Tri-City area and look at how the Hayward Fault goes through our area. Specifically, we're going to look at Tule Ponds. We're going to see how nature gives us clues about where these faults are. Then we're going to walk down to Central Park, Lake Elizabeth, to Stivers Lagoon, and that's going to show us the different offsets that we'll see over there. And this is how we trace the different faults. So let's take a look. I want to make sure that you understand a little bit about why we have earthquakes. There's something natural, and there's something that we need, because without an earth that is unrest, we would not have volcanoes, which eventually give us the water, if you remember from last week, that give us life. So a dead planet with no water would not have any earthquakes. So that's why we get excited when we look at Mars and they have Mars quakes. That tells you that the Earth is alive. And so let's take a look why we are alive. Now remember, we have stress on the Earth. That's what causes earthquakes. We have external problems, and we have internal stresses that cause earthquakes. The external one is just by our Earth rotating around and revolving around the sun, that causes different stresses. Now, if you look at this picture right here of the Earth, you notice this is the equator. The equator is moving about 1,000 miles per hour. But then if you go all the way up to the North Pole, where the polar bears live, they are only going very slowly, and sometimes not at all, because that's the axis of our rotation. And so this all causes stresses on the surface of our Earth. Now, if we look at this picture here, we see that inside the Earth, so let's take a look at this little model here. This is one that we use all the time. You'll notice that the crust, which is out here, and then we have the mantle, and then we have the mantle, then we have the outer core and the inner core. Now, please realize that our earthquakes are on the surface of the upper mantle and the crust. This is what we call, that's what we call this plate tectonics. That's what defines the plate. So if you look at the little map that we have right next to this area here on the right-hand side, you'll notice that there's something called the asthenosphere. And the asthenosphere is where the upper mantle and the plates are floating. And this is what is This movement here causes stresses along these, what we call these plate boundaries. Now, we have different kinds of plate boundaries, and that's a whole nother lecture that I would go into. But I want to make sure that you understand is that plates come together, they converge. This is what we call subduction, when one plate goes under another. This is abduction, like the Himalaya Mountains. Then we have diverging, where the plates go apart. And then the one that we're going to work more is this transform. Transform is where they are slip sliding apart. That is what we have in this area. So first of all, I want to read a little story called The Three Earthquake Dolls. Now this goes through three different scenarios of earthquakes throughout the from 1700s all the way here.
Three Earthquake Dolls by Joyce Bluford, animated by Doris Reyer and Hagos Tvolti. This is a story of three separate dolls going through three different earthquakes. The deadliest earthquake in the 20th century. Lin Ming helped her mother put away the bowls after supper. They had worked in the fields near the city of Tangshan in China. They had a small home surrounded by a small family garden that helped feed her two brothers, three sisters, a mother, a father, and a grandmother. July 27, 1976 was a strange day. The water level in the well rose high and then fell 3 times during the afternoon. It made it hard to get water. The animals seemed worried. The chickens were nervous and wouldn't eat. Mice and yellow weasels were running in the open fields and then darted for cover under branches during the day. Flocks of birds were flying overhead as if they were scared. Everyone noticed the odd behavior, but made nothing of it. They went to sleep at 11 p.m., which was usual for a summer night. Ling Ming put her favorite doll, Yi Min, which meant happy and smart, near her mat. Ling Ming would talk with her doll to help her go to sleep. Then, at 3:42 a.m. on July 28th, the entire house shook violently. Ling Ming tried to get up from her mat, but could not stand up. Her arms flew in front of her to try and stop the shaking. She saw her favorite doll fly into the air, as if someone hurled it into space. The house made a moaning sound as the wood was bending and stretching. Her father yelled to them to run outside in the open field for safety and to wait for everyone. He seemed to know what was happening. Ling Ming grabbed her doll and ran as her father instructed. They scrambled to get out, almost crawling. The shaking seemed to last for a long time, but they later found out it was only 16 seconds of a very terrible earthquake. The small house and quick response of Ling Ming's father saved the entire family. Many of their relatives that lived in Tangshan died on that horrible day the earthquake shook. A 7.8 magnitude earthquake hit the sleeping city of Tangshan in northeastern China. Over 240,000 people died that day. People were buried in the rubble of fallen buildings, while others were killed instantly. Many died because no one could get to their broken bodies. The earthquake was the deadliest earthquake of the 20th century. The Great Lisbon Earthquake. Maria Osorio was excited about the All Saints' Day holiday that was approaching. She could almost smell her mother's wonderful masa sovada, a delightful sweetbread. Maria's new dress was ready. Her mother made it because Maria was an only child, and it made her feel pretty and special. Maria's friends would be envious of her at church. Her mother also made a dress for Maria's favorite doll, Angelina. Maria was going to take Angelina to church. The Osorio family lived in a good part of Lisbon, Portugal. They could smell the sea breeze from the Atlantic Ocean and see the bustle of the fishermen along the Rio Teja. Maria's father Manuel worked for King Joseph I, the ruler of Portugal. At 9:30 a.m. on November 1st, 1755, everyone was just finishing getting dressed and about to go outside. The house began to gently tremble. The tremor turned into a hard shake. First, Maria thought it was a coach with many horses passing by the house. Then the rumbling of thunder and unbelievable shaking occurred. Manuel Osorio grabbed the hands of his wife and Maria as they ran outside to see what was going on. Maria held onto Angelina because she thought they would be going to church. The houses around them started to shake violently, and stones from the walls starting to crumble. As houses started to fall, dust and a pungent smell filled the air. The pieces of wood from the houses started to burn, and black soot filled the air. Manuel decided to run to the water and try to get a boat. As they ran, they heard people screaming for help. They saw bodies of people, young and old, under debris that had fallen. Maria was scared, and she held on to Angelina. They heard people screaming, "The sea is coming," and Manuel knew they had to run the other way. The wall of water was too much for his family, and they were swept under the foaming, frothy ocean wave. Only Angeline floated to the top. The Great Lisbon earthquake on November 1st, 1755, was centered near Cape St. Vincent in the Atlantic Ocean. The energy released by the break caused high waves, tsunamis, and killed over 10,000 people. They estimated that this was about a 9.0 magnitude earthquake. Over 85% of Lisbon was destroyed by the quake, fire, and tsunami. The entire Mediterranean felt the shock waves produced by the earthquake. About 10,000 people in Morocco, North Africa, was killed in a tsunami. If you look at this animation here, you can see that the earthquake occurred and it created a lot of energy being released, and the released energy made a big wave that when it hit into Portugal, it just swallowed the city. New Madrid earthquake. The United States in 1811 was only 35 years old. People were looking west to find a better life. Julia's family had just come from Virginia by covered wagon to a town called Little Prairie, Missouri. Missouri was not yet a state in the Union, but Julia's family was not concerned. The land was beautiful, covered with forest, with lots of animals that roamed free. Julia always had her doll Samantha with her. It was given to her by her grandmother, who decided to stay behind in Virginia. When she played with Samantha, she always pictured in her mind that she was talking to her grandmother. It made Julia forget that she missed back home. Little Prairie was now their home. The nearest big city was New Madrid, where they would buy supplies. Julia was very happy because they were getting ready to decorate their tree for Christmas. Father had gotten a sturdy pine tree, and they were decorating it on the night of December 15th. Julia left Samantha under the tree that night because she felt that Samantha would be happy there. Julia went to sleep, but was awakened by a blowing noise resembling the sound made by a blacksmith's bellows. She heard the church bell ring. Then her bed started to shake as if a strong man had taken hold of the post and violently shook. The windows and doors were quivering. Father yelled to everyone to run outside. The house and fences were covered with a white frost, but they were too scared to think of the cold. Their chimney started to break apart and fall to the ground, but their log cabin home did not collapse. After it stopped shaking, the family went back inside. Some of Mother's dishes were broken, but everything else seemed fine except the Christmas tree had fallen down. Samantha was lost under the branches. Julia started to cry, but Samuel, the oldest brother, picked up the tree and found Samantha. Julia was now happy again. Early in the morning of December 16th, 1811, a magnitude of at least 8.0 shook the bustling city of New Madrid, Missouri. This would be the first of a series of earthquakes that would strike this area in the winter of 1811 to 1812. January 23rd and February 7th, 1812. Its epicenter was on the New Madrid Fault. In southwestern Kentucky to Tennessee, there was up to 10 meters of uplift. In other parts of Tennessee, there was 6 meters of subsidence, causing new lakes to form. Even the Mississippi River changed its course. The end.
So now let's turn to what's happening in our area right now. Again, earthquakes occur all the time around our restless earth. But let's take a look at California as a whole. California, and you've probably heard of the San Andreas Fault. It goes most of just south of Eureka, all the way down, and it goes down into Baja California. Now, in the Bay Area, the San Andreas Fault is on it's toward the Pacific Ocean. So on this side, the Pacific Ocean, that's one plate. And then on the other, where you have Sacramento area, this is called the North American plate. We're in between this zone. So this is the San Andreas Fault zone. It includes the Hayward Fault, which is what we're worried about over here, and the Calaveras Fault. So we're going to concentrate in this area here. So our area is slip slide, or the technical term is more transform, where one area is moving against the other. So if you look at the San Andreas Fault, the Pacific plate is going north relative to the North American, causing stress in this area. If you go take a walk up to Mission Peak, or Mount Hamilton, or Mount Diablo, you'll start seeing the whole Bay Area in front of you. And all of a sudden you start noticing that there's parallel mountains and valleys. We're going to kind of learn why that occurs, but that is evidence of movement. Now, we are in, you can see Fremont over in the South Bay. This is the San Francisco Bay. San Andreas Fault is west of us, and this is the Hayward Fault. Now remember, the fault goes about 8 kilometers into the earth. So if you look at the picture right next to it on the right, you'll notice that there is cracks, but they go into the earth. That's kind of important to realize that we have deep earthquakes and we have shallow. It's the deep earthquakes that cause a lot of our problems because it takes time as the energy comes up, causing energy to form. Now this is the trace of the Hayward Fault from Fremont to Union City. Now, if you notice, it says the Fremont Earthquake Exhibit, and that's Lake Elizabeth right here. And then as we walk up or north to Tule Ponds, this is the area that we're going to basically take a better look at it. Now, notice too, the lines or the fault is not just one crack. It is not always together. It is jagged, because this is what nature does. There's different types of rocks that it goes through, and so it shows itself differently in different places. If we go to Mission Peak, you will notice this is Lake Elizabeth in the far area, and you can start seeing that we're on a hill here, and then they start aligning up. Now, let's take a look at Tule Ponds. Tule Ponds is one of the most seismologically studied areas in the world. Why? Because we know that this lagoon has been here pretty much undisturbed for at least 4,000 years, leaving a record in the sediments that accumulate. We'll talk a little bit that in a minute. But the trace of the Hayward Fault, this area here, the west side, is actually creeping. It is moving about 5 millimeters per year. Now that's going to be important when we start looking for evidence. Now we have another trace of the Hayward Fault in here, and this is more inside the earth. And this starts telling us about how the earthquake goes into the earth. So let's continue. The earthquake, just remember, like, why do we have Tule Ponds here? Well, Tyson's Lagoon is basically a sag pond caused by a depression of these stresses. But this is the Hayward Fault in here, and you can see we have quarry lakes, and that we have different lakes in the area when it breaches what we call the Niles cone. Mentioned that when we talked about water not that long ago. So let's take a look at, I've been using this picture of Tule Ponds quite a bit, where we have, these were created by humans. So this is pond, so these are what we call constructed wetlands. This is pond C, pond B, pond A. So this is the inlet, or the part of the Hayward Fault that's deeper in the ground. Now this is the area right in here, because we're going to take a walk from as soon as the creeping part of the Hayward Fault comes in, all the way over to the Butterfly Meadow, which we had discussed at one time. Okay, now, as I said, this is one of the most seismologically studied areas in the world. This is South Tule Ponds, and this is where they build these trenches or dig trenches. So this is what you call a backhoe, and they're digging deep straight into the earth. And they're trying to look at what the sediments, or all of this rock that is being accumulated, what story it tells. And then we can take this information to the lab. Now this was done by the U.S. Geological Survey. They took these trenches, and then they did this big thing called a geoslicer, and it actually slices into the earth, and they can take a thin peel, and then they can take that home and study in the lab. Now, what does it tell you? Now, if you look right here, and this mud art is right behind me. If we look right here, this is what a picture of this area like when you go down. And this gives us clues of what's going on here. So now if you look at these, now a fault is anything that's a break. So you can have a teeny weeny fault, or you can have a huge fault. But this right here, these red lines, these represent breaks as you go down. So it's giving us information. Now, as we're looking over here, you see that it's dark over here, dark over here. So if you look at where the dark, this side went down. But this is kind of neat over here. Scientists have found out that this right here, it kind of looks like a swirl, and this is an enlargement of it. That swirl tells you that that was about a 7.0 earthquake. Because what happens is when an earthquake occurs and the energy releases, then all of a sudden the sediment on the bottom of the earth compacts real quick. It goes up quick and then compacts quickly. And it leaves these what we call rip-up clasts. And these clasts tell you that this is a big earthquake. So scientists were able to find that there's quite a few of these, that this has been occurring for a long time. We also have evidence that the lake structure changes. The one right above it, those little white things, those are little microfossils. And those are telling you that the lake was bigger and that we had these shells in here also. So this is the kind of information that helps us retell the story. And that's what geologists do. We're detectives. We look at clues and then tell a story. Now let's take a look at where the earthquake comes in, or where the Hayward Fault comes into the ponds. This is a picture of where the Hayward Fault enters Tyson's Lagoon. You can see we're at the broadest part of Tyson's. So on the other side there, that's what we call the inactive trace of the Hayward Fault. And then, but what we're standing on right now is where the Hayward Fault comes into the area from other parts of Fremont. So this is an area, because we're going to allow people to walk in here. So you can actually come to where the Hayward Fault comes into Tyson's Lagoon. Now, we're going to take a look at what evidence do we have of this. And this we're going to see is, you have to be almost trained, but you guys can train and see it.
Tyson's Lagoon during the early 1800s was much larger. Then in 1868, the Great Quake caused a 6-foot offset and a 4-foot vertical in this area. You can see the fault scarp where the stairs are. And this prevented the water from going into what is now the seasonal wetland, the flat area right there, and prevented water from going over.
Now, this occurred, this earthquake, in 1868, so it's right after the Civil War. Not many people lived in this area, so there was not too many people to tell the story of what happened. But the whole area from Milpitas all the way to San Leandro was ripped 6 feet. That's a lot. That's a lot of energy. And then also in the Tule Ponds area, there was an uplift of about this much. And then this is the stairs that we're going to be looking at in the next little segment here.
As we're working from the storm drains, we see some stairs in the distance. We see kind of like an uplift, and we can see the Tyson's Lagoon right there. This here was caused by the Hayward Fault. On October 21st, 1868, there was a magnitude probably close to a 7, and it caused an offset of 6 feet horizontally and 4 feet vertically. And so this is what we call a fault scarp. You can see it all along the area. Tells of a time in 1868, frozen in time, of the Hayward Fault.
This actually wasn't really discovered until the UC Berkeley, their geology staff, because Berkeley didn't start until 1872. They came down here and they discovered this. That we did not know about faults. Now this, as we continue.
So we're walking along the active trace of the Hayward Fault, and you can see there's been some uplift in this area. This was probably caused by the displacement in 1868. And as we go down our trail, the Hayward Fault would be on our left. Now this too has been artificially built up so we could make a road on there. So urban interference has probably changed the natural contours.
So in 1868, guys, if you look at my hands, it was flat and then this side rose. That's what I mean when I use the term uplift. Now, just so you realize how important this was, before the 1906 earthquake, this was called the Great Quake in San Francisco. 1868, look at this devastation. This is the San Leandro City Hall. A lot of buildings were just collapsed. And even our Mission San Jose here, it collapsed and had to be fixed. And then it went down in 1906 too, had a lot of damage. But this is what happens when you have an earthquake. So now that's what happened over at Tule Ponds. Let's take a look at what's in the Stivers Lagoon area. And let's look at what evidence we see. Now you have to remember, at Tule Ponds, that's natural. We don't have a lot of cement anywhere. But when you go from Stivers Lagoon all the way to Tule Ponds, all of a sudden you see humans putting roads and putting asphalt. And there you'll see another clue.
This is the Stivers Lagoon area. The road I'm zooming in on is Rocket. This is where the Hayward Fault trace you can find. Now as I swing around to the left, the fault actually warping that building there. And as I turn around, we're going into where Stivers Lagoon is right now. The Stivers Lagoon is a depression. It used to be much larger, and is part of what we call
So
a sag
depressions
pond.
give us clues that it could have something to do with faulting. Now let's take a look at that rocket drive that I was talking. Look at this curve. This curve it starts going straight and then all of a sudden it curves. Well, engineers didn't do that. That's because this area right here where that curve is the Hayward Fault. Is one of the few faults in the world that is creeping. And that means, what that means, it's releasing stress a little at a time. And I've used the number about 5 millimeters per year. It is moving. And so over time, because this road here is about 60 years old, you start seeing cracks in this area. Now, nice thing about Central Park is the city put in signs so you can actually walk these traces. So you can go to Central Park anytime now and look at what we're going to go over. There's 6 stations and they outline the creeping part of the Hayward Fault. So you can learn and kind of walk with them. The building, however, is only open during field trips. So that's a little different, but at least you'll get to see it. This is the Fremont Earthquake exhibit. This building was built in 1962 as the first city hall. The cracks were first noticed. So take a look at this bottom left-hand corner and you'll see a crack. They didn't know what it was. This is before plate tectonics was actually accepted by all scientists. And so this building was here and all of a sudden the janitor comes in and finds a crack. This is the only surviving picture of it. Then they noticed over the year, they just put a rug over it and the building, they made a new city hall and then they just use this as a children's theater. Now it's a community center, only part of it is used. But then if you look over here to you'll see this in the next little video segment, you're going to see these offsets. So this and this, if you notice, these are all on one side going one way and on the other side, they're going against that. So this is inside this building, which is called the community center. Now let's take a look. Let's walk into. We are inside the earthquake exhibit in the community center in Fremont. As you can see, there's a crack in the ground. And what does that crack mean? Well, let's take a little closer to it. Those lines used to be the traces of the tiles. And as you can see, one side seems to be going one way and the other side is going the other way. This is the Hayward evidence
Fault.
Of creeping. Before there was debate, but once you start seeing evidence like this, luckily the city of Fremont kept this building. And this gives us clues that this is creeping that we never knew before. Who would have thought that faults can creep? Now, leave the Hayward Fault exhibit. You go to a lake called Lake Elizabeth, and you see mountains in the background. Now, as you turn around, you start seeing just what you think is a patio. But when you start walking closer, you start seeing evidence of breakage. So let's take a look at this wall here. Concentrate down here. You can see something is breaking it. And as you walk along, you notice that the concrete is cracked and it's following the direction of inside. Notice that the wood is bent. That's because different materials have different movement. So throughout, we call this the earthquake patio. You see cracks, and then when we have an activity for the children or an adult to actually like plot them on a map, and you start seeing, this is telling me something. So this is kind of the area we're going to be walking up. So from the building, we're going to go up to this knoll, and we're going to see that there's some more kinds of evidence. This is an example of the signs that you'll see. So you can stop and read and look and learn. But let's take a look from the patio.
Let's walk the length of the patio, and you'll see that some things just don't align up. But then further back, it does align. And then as you see there, in the distance, is a knoll. And that knoll is going to give us evidence that there is more movement
So guys, just so you
along
understand, a
this
knoll is
area.
just a kind of a little, we also call it a compression ridge, but basically it's where you would run up and run down. Like a lot of people think that, oh, the engineers just made a nice place so kids can roll down. Not. This is a natural, and this is to geologists something important. So we're going to now kind of walk along the side, and we're going to look. This is the senior center over here, so we're going to go to that back parking lot and see what we can see. Now, here we have a moving parking lot. And so here, these are just showing us the sign again that's over there. And we'll see these, it looks like a curve over here, but let's look at this more and then notice these cracks. Is that telling us something? So this is the park.
We are now on the other side of the knoll. Let's see if there's any evidence of an earthquake. So as we go around, curve is okay. But then in the distance, what do you see? As we get closer and closer, can you see the bend in the curb? And if we look at the bend and we look around, we start to see a lot of cracks. And these cracks are telling you it's part of the Hayward Fault creeping at about 5 millimeters per year. Let's go on the
Okay,
other
so
side
these
of this
cracks
car.
and that bend. Now, I want to impress on you that it is not just moving along that crack, it's the whole area that's moving. So when you saw that curve, that whole area is moving one way and the other is moving. It is just, this is what we call a zone of weakness. So that's why it always cracks in the same place. Now, let's go on the other side.
Let's go on the other side of the cars, and we notice a crack. That's caused from the creeping. And then as you go around toward the arrow, you start seeing end echelon cracks. And as we go along, we notice that the arrow is kind of offset, and you follow this end echelon faulting or breaks. In French, that means stairs. It's a stepwise. And then we go into another area where you can see another pretty large offset. Now, if you notice, you don't see anything. You see a knoll, but you don't see any break in the ground. That's because the ground will
What I
heal
mean by heal
itself.
itself is that when it rains or when you're cutting the grass, it just heals itself. The earth can do that. I used a big word, en echelon, when I was showing you those cracks. Now, en echelon is not the same, because you're probably thinking, oh, those are just because a tree or because they built it incorrectly or something. But no, these en echelon, that pattern that you saw is what we call migrating breaks. Those are evidence of movement or creep. And so seismologists, geologists always look for these kind of en echelon faults on man-made structures like asphalt especially, because it tells a story of creep. Now, how did we create these East Bay Hills? Well, these East Bay Hills, this is the Diablo Range. This is what you, if you're at Lake Elizabeth, you can see these mountain ranges. Now, it's called the Diablo Range. This is Mission Peak, you can see up there. Now, one thing about the Hayward Fault, it comes out of the hills and into our Lake Elizabeth for some reason. Again, that's another story. This is showing you this picture here that the Hayward Fault goes into the earth. And we have learned so much with every single earthquake that occurs. We can now trace pretty good the traces of the Hayward Fault in the Bay Area. But let's take a look at what those mountains tell us.
As you can tell, there's a depression here, and the Diablo Range, which is the mountain ranges in the background. This was all caused, this uplift, from compression along the San Andreas Fault system, which the Hayward Fault, the Calaveras Fault is all part of.
Mountains that we have was caused by this whole San Andreas Fault system causing uplift and movement over time. Now, we have some other areas here. Now, we're going to take a little look at this area here. When we first started this project, this was only about 3 inches, and now it's about 3.5 inches. If you notice, this is also uplifting in this area. This is on Sailway Drive. And this was back in 2006, we built a big hole into the ground, and we allowed people to go down this area to look at how the Hayward Fault is right next to each other. But it is unfortunately no longer there. But let's go down.
We're now on Sailway Drive. As you can see, the curb looks pretty straight, but all of a sudden, near that sign, something looks weird. This is the largest offset in the Fremont area. It's about 3.5 inches, and it has cracked this area. But not only has it cracked it, it has uplifted the area. You can see where they've shaved let's go back. You can see where they've shaved, and look at this offset. Now let's go across on Sailway Drive. Now they recently fixed this area so we don't see an echelon faulting breaks until probably a few more years.
Every time I walk by there, I look for cracks, and there's definitely starting some cracks forming. So I would say in another 5 years, we'll have our N-echelon faults right back. Now, this is going toward the old library and the old city hall.
Let's look for more evidence of the Hayward Fault. As we come along this curve here, you see an offset, and then you see these cracks in the asphalt, and that's showing N-echelon faults caused by that slow creeping every year. So as we're going into another area, this is where we dug a huge trench, went down and could see either side of the Hayward Fault. But then as you're going further up, you start seeing a knoll. And that knoll is a compression knoll. And this is where they built the second city hall, that in the 1989 earthquake, it was so conflicted and cracked that they had to tear it down.
So if you've never seen the old city hall, this was damaged in 1989. It was a cement structure. Cement does not do well in the Hayward Fault. And this is what the knoll looks like kind of today. So the police department is just right over that knoll. So not a good place to have built. But you have to remember, when this was first designed, it was in the early 70s, and they did not really know a lot about how faults impact buildings. Now, what Debbie will come in and start seeing how you can do some experiments at home on your own, so you can learn more about the structure that we're having. So, Debbie's here. Hi, everybody. All right, we've got a few activities for you. Let's get started.
Hi, everybody. Just finishing up a picture here. If you go to our website where we have the field trips and all, you will find the storybooks that we're doing and also things that you can print off. Here's one activity that shows you all of the fault lines of the San Francisco Bay. And on my picture here, you see I've already colored my water blue. Your land can either be colored brown, gray, green, whatever color you would like. And then you'll see I've also gathered up some string or some pipe cleaners, again, whatever you have. And then all you're going to do is use a little bit of a glue stick, and you're going to put some glue right along this part here. You guys know what this star is? The star on this map is for Fremont. So this is Fremont if you live in Fremont. So now I've got my glue all along the Hayward Fault, and now I'm just going to put this yarn right there on top. So if my yarn is a little long, you can trim it off if you want to, or you can leave it. That's up to you. And now this map gives you faults of the whole Bay Area. Remember, our Hayward Fault is unique because that's a fault line that's creeping. Now let's see, another one that we hear a lot of is the San Andreas Fault. So again, I'm going to use a little bit of my glue, and then I'm gonna, again, you can use different colors, same colors. This time I picked a little bit of pink for San Andreas Fault. And I always like to do it so I can still see the names of the fault lines. But you get the idea. So again, this will give you a nice map of the fault lines and the fault areas of the Bay Area.
Okay, again, those printouts can be found on our website along with the links to the storybooks and all from today. Let's see what else we've got. These parallel mountains and valleys. Dr. Joyce discussed these a lot. Here's an experiment you can try.
We were just looking at a relief map, how it shows over the plate movement over millions of years has created parallel mountains and valleys. A simple experiment though you can do at home. Simply use a piece of paper, put your two hands down, and when you pull and push opposite directions, then you see how the paper starts to crinkle. Do you see those where you could be your mountaintops and what could be your valleys? You see you get parallel mountains and valleys. Now another thing other than just paper, you could try a piece of aluminum foil. Same thing, just flat out aluminum foil. I put my two hands, one's going to be the Pacific plate, one's the North American plate, and they're going to slip slide past each other. And as they slip slide, you'll see there, parallel mountains and valleys. So that's exactly how the mountains and valleys were formed in our area.
Okay, so that's kind of fun to look at. As you start looking around and you're driving around in your car, start paying attention to where those low points are and where those high points are. Look at that Mount Diablo range. Let's go ahead and look at this relief map.
Of the San Francisco Bay region, and a relief map shows us elevation. It shows us the rises that are mountains and the lower, deeper parts that are valleys. So as we look at this map, I'm going to point out right here is the Fremont area. Okay, so there we are in Fremont. And then over here is the San Francisco city part. And then in the middle, we've got the San Francisco Bay. So remember that underneath the water is a valley floor. So that's why we can talk about these low points or these low valleys. So, but you see the whole valley as we go through this area here. Now, how was that created? That was created from these plates moving. So we have the North America plate and the Pacific Ocean plate. This plate's moving north, the North American plate's moving south. As these plates move across each other, they slip slide. That's creating these parallel mountains and valleys. So as we look through this relief map, again, here's our low valley, and we've got mountains on each side. But if you look even closer, look right through here. There's a low valley that goes and follows kind of a line down here. That would be the San Andreas Fault. and we are part of that larger system. So Fremont over here, remember the Hayward Fault kind of runs right along this way, and you can see it goes all the way up through here. And again, all of these cities run right along that Hayward Fault. So again, as these two plates are moving over millions of years, it creates this slip slide action, which causes these parallel mountains and valleys.
Okay, some of those maps and all you'll get to see if you ever get over here to Tule Ponds, and also to the Children's Natural History Museum, or if you go to that earthquake exhibit. There are lots of other areas too that you can see signs of the earthquake, like Point Reyes and all. So you've got a lot of options here in this area. But this is a really fun activity, shaker tables. So this is where you can explore different materials, your building powers. Those of you that are Lego guys or Lego girls, you can build big, huge cities and you can see how they react. Now remember when we were taking the tour, we saw how the wood was being bent and we saw how the concrete was being crumbled. So keep that in mind as far as your materials. Let's see how to do shaker tables.
It's time for shaker tables. If you're living in an area that has earthquakes, then you need to know what's going to happen, so how you can engineer your buildings better and have your escape plans, have your safety plans together. So in a shaker table, all you need is just a plastic lid that'll hold some marbles together, just like this. That'll work just fine. And you can either use a plastic tray like that. I have a small piece of wood, so I'm going to try that. It's going to move around. Yeah, that's going to work just fine. All right, so for our shaker table, if we're trying to come up with a design that's going to be the most stable for a building, and if I start out with just cups, is that going to be stable there? You have to do your experiments to think about it and experiment. Let's see, if we do a small earthquake, it would be something like this, small, slow. A medium earthquake, a little bit moved, and then you could have a large earthquake. Oh no. All right, so maybe having the cups like that in a straight line is not the most stable. So your first experiment is to play with the cups. Are they more stable like this or like this? Would they be more stable in a different shape? Maybe something like that, something like this. So again, that's for you to play with. So you're going to make a small earthquake, a medium earthquake, and a large earthquake, and see what happens, again, to your shaker table, just using simple cups. Now, if you want to get fancy, you can try all different kinds of building materials. So if you look over here, I've got all kinds of these. So you can create and build building structures however you would like. I also have some like this. You can spend all day building these. Got a bit of a tower started there. I can build up high. I can build like the highest building. Even if you think about your own building, if it's got parking garages or it's a couple stories, and I could have some low things as well. A lot of Fremont's lower buildings. I've got even these kind of blocks that interlock all different ways. So again, this is just for you to play with. Again, it's whatever kind of toys or building you have, and if you don't have any of those, then you can use those cups. You can use all different things. So these are locking together. These I'm just sticking up here together, so they're not really locked together. They're just like that. So again, with our shaker table, we're going to simulate a small, medium, large kind of earthquake. The earthquake may be fast, could be slow. So I'll just start out with a slow, small earthquake. So that would be just a little motion. Okay. Anytime we've got glass breaking, we are going to have at least a 7-0. So that would look more like this. Oh no. So you've got to do some engineering. You've got to figure out how you can keep your structures from falling over. How can you keep the base of your buildings from falling off of their foundations. Again, play with the sizes and how tall you can make them. Do all of your engineering. Figure out what you can get to withstand even the largest earthquake that you can give on a shaker table. And you can play again as much as you want. I've got all kinds of, oh, here's a gorilla we could add, a little bit of a fence, some people, some dolls. I think I even have, yep, I even have a dinosaur that can get in the act of the shaker table. So again, this is for you to play. Become the engineer, the designer, and see if you can make something that can survive the earthquakes of the Bay Area. Okay, so that gives you an idea of some things that you can try, again, to develop your engineering, your design skills, but it's an opportunity to look at your own house, the own structure that you live in. Remember, a lot of the homes in this Bay Area were built before we even knew what faults were. So again, we can see signs all around, but look at your own house and see how it has been engineered or retrofitted. One of the issues that we have is the bolting of foundations. So the actual house, the structure, would just simply fall off of the foundation. So even when you're playing with your shaker table, you could use Play-Doh, something like that to be your bolt as far as mounting it to the foundation. So that might be something else you can play with. I know the library, Fremont Library, has some pretty cool retrofitting. Even the earthquake building, where we have that little classroom with the faulted floor, those beams in there had to be retrofitted as well. So again, it's a constant effort to keep on top of all of this engineering, because it's always constantly moving with our Hayward Fault. It's creeping. All right, let's see what we've got next. Welcome back, everybody. Because we do live in the Bay Area and it's an area that's moving, we need to have a safety plan. Okay, so make sure you talk about it with your parents. Make sure you have a safe place to gather, and most of all, practice it. Now, what I have here is a really cool little book. This is an old book I used to have that opens up to be a house. So if you look down here at our house, I've placed my little dog up here. I'm going to pretend that I'm in bed. It looks like somebody else is here in the kitchen. And somebody else is over here. See, I've used whatever I have. Our polar bear is going to be a pretend on the stairs. So what happened if we had an earthquake at this point? What would you do? You kind of have to think about where you are, and again, make a plan of where your safe place to be, where you're going to meet. So for example, if we had an earthquake while we were here at Tule Ponds, we would want to be very careful of this. You see, that's the sound of breaking glass. That would be one of our biggest problems. So we would, here at Tule Ponds, we're so close to the door that we would just run straight out the door and meet by the fence. Okay, that would get us away from any of the dangers. But if we had, let's see, if you were in your bed, where would the safest place be? You got to be careful of things that might be falling on you. So again, if you can get outside, that's the safest place. If you can't, then try to get underneath someplace that's got a good top to it, somewhere that's safe. Again, maybe you could get your dog under there with you. If it's not too far from, again, the person that's here in the kitchen, maybe they could run out the front door if they can get to the front door, and that would be better. And again, already have a place to meet. Maybe your meeting place would be out by your car or a tree out at the front of your apartment or house complex. Okay, so again, anytime you're going to have an earthquake, you're going to have some strange sounds. You're going to feel some motion and hear some strange things. This is a weird sound. You may not again know what it is, but again, you're going to be hearing all kinds of noises, feeling all kinds of motions during the earthquake. So make sure you have a safety plan, whether it's for earthquakes, fires. You may live in other places of the country that have tornadoes and hurricanes. We all need to have a plan. So be safe. Okay, so the big thing is to talk about what you would do if an earthquake was to happen, if you would feel some shaking, have your safety plan involved. Even if it's for fire, it's all the same. You just have to talk about it and again, practice it. Now we've put up a new slide here that shows that if you are interested to coming to Tule Ponds, that we are doing small groups, small family groups.
You can set up and reserve those times to come through and just do your own self-guided tour. It'll walk through and you'll see a lot of the information that we've been showing you over these past couple virtual tours. And I guess this is the last one of the virtual tours that we're doing for a little while, and we will just look for more information. Again, you can get in touch with us at that field at mathsciencenucleus.org.
Well, thank you, everybody.
We see there are a couple of you that still have questions maybe we didn't get to. Hang on to those questions and come visit us at Tule Ponds. And again, get your parents to look up these addresses for us and get in contact, and we hope to see you soon.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye, everybody.